everyone, I'm Natalie Alexander. Welcome to the Commons here at the UN Library and Archives, Geneva, and to our playlist, The Journey to the Summit of the Future. The summit is less than a year away now and is expected to produce a pact for the future, which aims to strengthen international cooperation to be able to better serve present and future generations and be able to collectively act on the challenges, but also the opportunities that we don't even know of yet of our future. And we also know that the threats and the opportunities that we're facing are not siloed. Everything from the climate crisis to emerging technologies impact different people in different ways. So is multilateralism intersectional? Is it fit to be able to serve the needs of people with different lived experiences? This is the question we're going to be asking today, and I'm very, very happy to be here with Adriana Quiñones, who is UN Women's Liaison Office in Geneva's Head of Human Rights and Development. Adriana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
I wanted to really begin with you looking at defining intersectionality. It's not, an old term, but it's certainly not completely new either. It was coined in 1989 by lawyer, civil rights advocate, and scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. So I wanted to ask you, from your view and the work of UN Women, what is intersectionality and what does it mean at UN Women?
So for us at UN Women, intersectionality is part of everything that we do because people live in different contexts, under different conditions, and I have different identities. So what we want to make sure is that we reach everyone. And when we look at rights of women and girls, they are crossed by many different factors. For example, age, migrant status, gender identity, gender orientation, race. All of these conditions have an impact on development outcomes, their opportunities to participate, and the levels of inclusion and enjoyment of their human rights that they can have. So we always are looking at the ways in which women can participate. For example, it's not the same for a woman who has been born with a disability to participate, or when we're having a program to end violence against women and we don't look at the realities of indigenous women, of young girls, we're not going to have the desired impact. So intersectionality crosses everything that we do. We also look at intersectionality as a product of historical processes of colonialism, social norms, the way that countries are organized, North and South. All of this has an impact on the actual experience, the lived experiences of women and girls.
Yeah. And so when we think about these kind of compounding factors that impact people differently, why should we care about this more broadly in multilateralism? How can, the values of intersectionality be applied to global governance?
So one of the key aspects of human rights is participation and inclusion and accountability. Unless we take on all the different characteristics and the factors that affect people's lives, we are not going to be able to have impact. We're just going to have theoretical pronouncements about human rights. And we see here in the Human Rights Council how there's an increased effort to ensure the access to services, the access to decision-making of very different groups in their diversity and also celebrating that diversity. And unless we take into account those conditions, we are not going to be able to fulfill that.
Do you think that multilateralism is applying an intersectional lens today in its work?
We are always struggling to have an intersectional approach and lens in everything that is done. And I feel like unless we are there looking for the specific words, the specific actions, the budgets, the implementation, we will not be able to ensure that intersectionalism is going to be applied. So we're always seeing if this is a principle that's being applied, if this is a lens for the design of public policies, for the implementation, if the resources are there. We look at gender-based budgets. It's something that's critical to ensure that intersectionality is applied and not just rhetoric.
Yeah. I think that, one of the things that is very present in the substance around the Summit of the Future. The policy briefs, the HLAB recommendations, are the terms, interconnectedness, the fact that we have complex, related, linked challenges. The term intersectionality is not so much used in the literature in the lead up to the summit. Is this, do you think, concerning, or is it something that we shouldn't see as just a term, but something, like you said, more integrated in what we do?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't take this for granted. I think we are at UN Women looking very closely at each of the policy briefs, at the statements, working with member states to ensure that intersectionality is present, that we are not forgetting a specific approach. And for me, it's very interesting because if you think about Afro-descendant women or women with disabilities or young women, they all have a different perspective of how they want to be included, how they want to be seen. But in common, they all say nothing about us without us. And this is something that we need to make sure happens along the way, from the preparations to the summit, to the final declaration, to the actions that are going to take place afterwards.
Yeah. I wanted to dive a bit deeper into that a bit later on in our discussion, but it would be great to hear more from you about what intersectionality means in practice at UN Women. Are there any examples or ways that you could share that UN Women is kind of making sure that intersectionality is the lens in which you're working to achieve gender equality?
Yeah. There are several examples. I think one of the ones that is most important is what we discovered during COVID. What we saw was that there was an increased impact on women and girls in terms of the hours that they were occupying in taking care of children, the elderly, other sick people, how, for example, the burden of care was on women, how violence against women increased dramatically during COVID, and how climate solutions can come out of this crisis to insert women in the labor market, to open up increased participation for jobs in different fields. So we saw the different trends of how services were not reaching particularly domestic workers, women living with HIV/AIDS, or all services stopped. And so they were left without support at a critical time. And here's where we see that they were already in a position of exclusion and marginalization. And unless you have the actual actions to support, to protect these populations, they will be left behind. And so we saw that there were so many different studies that UN Women produced looking at these different impacts for women and girls. And so this, to me, shows us that we cannot have policies that apply across the board in the same way, because people are coming from different status with different education, health outcomes. And so then to integrate them in the appropriate way, to support them, to have social protection, we need to make sure that everyone is included within their diversity.
Yeah. And UN Women has also come up with a toolkit on intersectionality that is available for partners, for stakeholders, for other bodies to use to be able to begin to look at how we can apply intersectionality to policies and programs and really make them more comprehensive. Is there anything that you could share in terms of principles or ways that can inspire others to move beyond just the work of UN Women to other areas of the global challenges we're facing?
Something that I really like about this manual is this principle around questioning our beliefs, our prejudices, our biases, but also our privilege. And I think when you have policymakers or colleagues working in development, we come already thinking we know what's needed, we know what to implement and how it should be done. But we need to make sure that everyone who's going to be participating in a program, in a policy, that they are included, that their voices are heard, and the mechanisms are in place for their ideas, their contributions. And this also increases ownership, sustainability of any project. So to me, questioning privilege is critical to ensuring social justice, to ensuring that efficacy and efficiency, and is something that we're not always looking as part of results-based management, as part of the principles of programming, but it is essential because we may be doing harm, which is one of the principles that we have in any of the work that we do, is do no harm. So this is, to me, to have this as one of the key points of departure is essential, so that we are always questioning what we are thinking from our vision of the world, because we're conditioned from the place that we were born, the conditions, the access to services and opportunities, and so we cannot assume that it is the same for everyone else.
And I guess building on from that, in an interview, Crenshaw said that the point of intersectionality is to make room for more advocacy and remedial practices to create a more egalitarian system. What does that mean to you? Like, how can we support not just advocacy, but remedial practices? And like you mentioned, not assume what people need, but bring them to share what they need and to share the many different experiences they have when they are faced with an issue, whether it be a lack of job support, the impact of climate change, the impact of racism or discrimination, from their point of view and their own experience.
Yes, I speak a lot about my experience in Guatemala because I was a country representative there. And it was very impactful for me to see a sentence on sexual violence in conflict that was achieved by indigenous women who do not speak Spanish, who are illiterate, and who do not have a lot of resources. But after years and years of struggle, they were able to get 18 measures of reparations for sexual violence during conflict. And they were able to put in jail military officials who were guilty of rape during the war. And so I think this has created such a transformation and a shift in the way we are looking at these issues of discrimination, how particular groups can be targeted, how just access to justice is not readily there, how many times a measure of reparation can really increase the participation of an excluded group. And so in this case, it was around having access to schools, to a health center, to have this sentence actually translated into several languages of the Mayan languages. And this has enabled these women who are older now, and we call them the abuelas, to really become leaders in their community, leaders for all the struggles on access to justice around the world. And for me, it's a very clear example of what intersectionality means.
Yeah. That's an incredible story. And you mentioned, they're a bit older now, and I guess they've got a lot of history behind them and what they achieved. I did have a question on history. What about looking at our past? It's something we do a lot here at the Library and Archives, especially on the history of multilateralism, and that's super important to us to be able to explore that. But is an understanding of our history important to an intersectional approach?
Absolutely. We need to continue working on the shoulders of what has been achieved. In terms of women's rights and gender equality, it is incredible all that has been gained in terms of access to vote, access to the labor market, access to the positions of decision making. And so we need to stand on those shoulders and stop starting from zero if there has not been such momentous progress that we have achieved. I think ever since the Beijing Platform of Action, that's going to be 30 years next year, there has been such incentives for public policies, for gender-based budgets, for increasing the participation of women and girls that we cannot leave that behind. And definitely, the struggles, for example, for racial equality inform the struggles for gender equality, the struggles and all the ambitions and aspirations of, for example, persons with disabilities also help us see through a different lens and enrich those experiences. So to me, we need to learn that history. We need to stand on what has been achieved, and we need to move it forward.
Yeah. On that note, the Summit of the Future is coming up, and it is being informed by, we mentioned the policy briefs of the Secretary General, as well as the shifts recommended by the High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism, or the HLAB. One of the HLAB shifts is focusing on how do we rebuild trust in multilateralism, specifically looking at inclusion and accountability. There are many different recommendations in that shift, but it does highlight the need for including marginalized groups more in multilateralism, especially the architecture of it. The need to also strengthen how gender equality and equity in the multilateral architecture. It also states that effective multilateralism is only possible if we achieve SDG 5, which is on gender equality and empowering women and girls. What is your reaction to Shift 1? How can we make multilateralism more inclusive and accountable?
I think we need to know that all the targets for SDG 5 will not be met by 2030. We are not even close to meeting the targets. And this means that we need to ensure that SDG 5, as the key to achieving all the other SDGs, is central to the agenda. So that is the first piece. The other one is around participation, effective participation, and inclusion. For that, UN Women has several mechanisms. We have civil society advisory groups in every country and regional office. We have the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund that's enabling women to participate in peace processes, in humanitarian crisis, with immediate support for them on the ground. We have the support of gender experts to the commissions of inquiry in the Human Rights Council to make sure the voices of women are heard and are reported back to the Council in situations of conflict. So it is critical that we have the resources and the mechanisms. Women's organizations are asking more and more to gain access to resources that are not earmarked, that do not have so many obstacles and burdens in terms of reporting, in terms of their ability to use the funding for where it's needed. And that, to me, is trust. When we are able to say, look, a grassroots organization is going to be the partner of choice for the UN because it's going to enable us to have a direct dialogue, to also share and have synergies between the knowledge of these groups and the knowledge that the UN can bring, and really enhance the cooperation. I think there's a lot of silos, and it really hampers the ability of what we are doing to reach the goals that we have put forward. But especially if you look at it from the perspective of SDG 5, the targets are not even close.
Yeah, and this is really concerning. So one thing you mentioned there is trust to you means being able to access funds more quickly, less, I guess, barriers to that, and really trusting women and those who need, support to be able to have the knowledge to share it and to be able to have that support when needed, not necessarily if it's too late.
Definitely. And also, for example, UN Women supports shadow reporting, different perspectives in terms of decision-making so that governments can really have access to different perspectives, have the voices of women and girls represented, of different groups, perhaps hear some truths of what they have not reached and what they can really become when they include these marginalized groups.
Yeah. Could we dive a little deeper into what that means at the local, regional, national, but also international level? How can we really ensure inclusion and representation of women and marginalized groups so that they can bring their knowledge and their voice to the multilateral system?
Yeah. I think that we have been working for a long time with the public sector, but more and more we need to engage the private sector with specific measures, with access also to the global conversations and local conversations on how we advance rights. And so UN Women launched in 2021 Generation Equality. It's at its midpoint now. It has 6 action coalitions that are really designed to move this agenda forward in terms of poverty alleviation, women's economic empowerment, climate justice, the women's movements, sexual and reproductive health and rights. So we need to make sure that we look at this agenda as a comprehensive one, but also ensure that there's another coalition on access to technology and innovation, that everything that's happening in the world involves these groups, but also creates a movement towards shared goals. To me, this is critical for accountability, that we are working towards shared goals, that we have ownership, and that we are making sure that the people who are most to benefit from these kinds of initiatives are there at the table.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because despite the fact that we know the challenges we're facing are not siloed, they're connected, and as we've been discussing, can have compounding effects on different people. I think we're still living quite in a world where we do see these issues as quite separate, and that, you know, the women's agenda is separate to other challenges, and that it kind of creates divides. How can we be inspired by intersectionality to see that it's not a zero-sum game? Like, we are all here together, and the challenges we face will affect us all differently, but we need to move forward together. What is your message in terms of that?
I think there's enough evidence by now that when you include a gender perspective, when you include the groups where you want to be creating a transformation, the benefits are there, but not only for those people who participate, but for generations to come. So I think it's critical that we, in a way, step on this because of all the knowledge that has been produced, because of all the public policies, and go now more into the evaluation of what has worked. I think also there needs to be a very honest conversation about what has worked and what hasn't, and be able to learn from mistakes, be able to compensate and to look into how we can do things better, leave no one behind, but in a conversation. And I think this is something where intersectionality really helps us understand the realities of different groups in a way that enables them to have a voice, to participate, and to have access to resources.
Yeah. What do you hope will be achieved with regard to an intersectional approach at the summit? Is there something that you could give advice to, to people out there wondering, what are they going to achieve at the summit? What is an inspirational part of intersectionality that we could hope that the summit could achieve?
I keep going back to the tools that we have. We have the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination, the CEDAW Committee that, to me, has with its, now it's going to be 40 recommendations on every single aspect of this convention. If we are able to implement that, if we are able to just build from there, from what we know are the minimum basic rights on how to access justice, on the importance of women machineries and budgets, on the importance of course, increasing women's access to resources and economic empowerment. I think from there, we can continue to build on, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to implement what we have. So for me, this is critical. There are different conversations around different treaties or different bodies, but if we were just to implement and strengthen what we already have, we will achieve greatly for the SDGs, for the Sustainable Development Agenda, for what each country wants to give its population.
Yeah. Adriana Quiñones, thank you so much for joining us today. The final question we wanted to ask you is really, what is your hope and outcome for the summit, and what would you like to leave with our audience?
Well, my invitation is for us to renew our commitment to what has already been achieved, to what the women's movement has achieved in terms of explaining the needs, the dreams of different women and girls in all of their diversity. I hope that as a multilateral system, we can stop working in silos. We can see human rights as a comprehensive but substantive agenda that we need to move forward working together and not separately. That, for me, will be the greatest success for the summit.